This training is client rights. It goes over individual rights, the Human Rights Committee, or HRC, rights modifications, and notice to suspend rights. So first, we're going to go over individual rights. So every individual has the right to humane treatment. It's responsibility of all service agencies and community center boards to prohibit mistreatment, exploitation, neglect, abuse in any form. Unless a person's rights are modified by a court order, a person with an IDD has the same legal rights and responsibilities guaranteed to all other persons under the federal and state constitution and federal law. So individual rights, individuals, the agency must have policies and procedures in place to ensure people have human and statutory rights. Information on rights is provided to all persons receiving service in an individually accessible manner. Parents of minors, guardians, and authorized representatives. Agencies are to provide an ongoing support to individuals to exercise their rights, and any document that outlines the client's rights should be made and available to them in a manner that is accessible and that they are able to comprehend. So for us here, we have, this is our rights form. It has pictures and the different rights that a person has. We also have it in written form as well. So just, to eat good food, choice of religion, right not to be abused, the right of privacy, fair pay for work, send and receive mail, they have the right to vote, medical services, complain if they don't get services or if they're hurt, a place to put their things, and the participation in individual plans. So the final rule, in 2014, the Federal Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services published a rule requiring HCBS to be provided in settings that meet certain criteria. So as an agency, the state puts out what we have to make sure that the individuals are supplied with and a setting that meets a particular criteria. The criteria ensures that HCBS participants have access to their benefits of community living and live and receive in services integrated in non-institutionalized settings. So that means even though they have an IDD or anything going on, we're not just going to swoop up everybody and put them in one centralized location and make it where it's only people that have disabilities. So some of the rights they have to have are integrated in full support to access to the greater community. One of the biggest things that we promote is making sure that they're able to go into the community, whether it's grocery stores, yoga, anything where they can learn how to be more independent. Are selected by them from among various options, including non-disability specific settings and options for a private unit. So we want to make sure that they have options when they're looking for places to live, places to interact, and it's not something that's just for people with disabilities. And we want to make sure that they have all the options that they want. So even selecting providers, we want to make sure that they have options and are able to select from a variety of provider options. Ensure privacy, dignity, respect, and freedom from coercion and restraint. Optimize individual incentives. Autonomy and independence. So that can be anywhere from inside the household to doing their own laundry, cleaning, making sure that they're able to shower and learn how to take care of themselves. Doing the community where they're grocery shopping and picking out their groceries and paying for them. If they're going to, they have a cell phone bill, paying that on their own, knowing how to navigate community and home as independent as possible. Facilitate individual choice regarding services and supports and who provides them. So obviously, if they have day program, providers, agencies, these are all choices for them. If they don't like anything that their day program does or their provider, within reason, if they want to do other options or look at other things, then we have to provide that to them. So residential agreement, I know back in the beginning of the year, we started doing the residential agreements for all the clients and the providers. So this is basically a person has a lease giving them the same responsibilities and protections from a veteran as other tenants in the area, or have a rented residential agreement giving them comparable protections. This is a lease that protects the client as a renter and the provider as the one renting out the space. So we want to make sure that they are protected as well as the provider. So if you get mad, you can't just see, you have to leave. So you have to do things like, give 30-day notice, make sure that they have access to the area. If there's any damage, it has to go through the proper chains. So this is just protecting the client as the renter and the provider as the rentee. People have the right to live and receive HCBS in settings that meet the following additional criteria. So people have privacy in the residential units. They must have doors and locks. They can choose their roommates if there are any. They can furnish and decorate as they like. People have freedom and support to control their schedules, activities, and have access to food at any time. So unless there is a rights modification saying that they cannot have access to food at certain periods of time or alone, and that has to be because a safety risk or a health risk. If they want to wake up and get a midnight snack, they're allowed to. The same for if they don't want to go to day program or you offer to take them to the library, anything like that, and they say, no, I don't want to do that today, then it's their choice because they are an adult. We do have to document that in the daily notes that, what was offered and that they did deny it and they didn't want to go. That way we can see what's being offered as far as activities, and it's just they're making that conscious choice that they don't want to do these things. So they can have visitors of choosing at any time, and their setting must be physically accessible. That's a very important one. The physically accessible setting will never change. So Human Rights Committee, or HRC. So each community center board is required to have an HRC. It's made of a variety of people to safeguard the rights of a person. The HRC reviews psychotropic medications, restrictive procedures, suspension of rights, safety control procedures, and emergency control procedures. They also investigate mistreatment, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So psychotropic medications, under the right to medical care and treatment, meds cannot be administered without a physician's order. They must be reviewed annually by a psychiatrist. Persons have the right to be free from unnecessary or excessive medications. Medications shall not be used for staff convenience or provider convenience, and staff is appropriately trained to deliver the medications. No PRN psychotropic medications. So that would be if you have, let's say, anxiety and the doctor prescribes it and it is a psychotropic medication and they say take it as needed when the anxiety flares up, it would have to be something they would have to take every day, but only if it's a psychotropic medication. Any meds to treat new symptoms of a psychiatric diagnosis, and reviewed annually by the HRC. So it is no longer required that an in-person review at TRE, although the community may ask to review in person if there are questions. So typically what they do is we send them the packet, they review it. If they have any questions, they'll reach out to me, and then I'll reach out to the provider if it's something that they need to handle. So we have rights modifications. So what is a rights mod? It is a limitation or restriction to the right of a person under the HCBS final rule. So we have right suspensions, restrictive procedures, and others such as house rules. And then we have our emergency control procedure and safety control procedure. So emergency control procedure, like it says in its name, it's used in case of an emergency. So it is an unanticipated use of a restrictive procedure or restraint used in crisis situation to keep a person and others safe. They may develop by agencies and their policies, i.e. the manholes for emergency situations, or maybe interventions that are so unplanned that they are not developed at all. Typically, if we have 3 emergency control procedures in 30 days, the ID team will meet and discuss the need to make it a safety control procedure or come up with a safety control procedure. So this would be like if you're walking down the street and your client darts out into the road and you have to grab them and stop them, then you put your hands on them and that's become an emergency control procedure. So an SCP is used to control a previously exhibited behavior which is anticipated to occur again. The planned method of intervention is developed ahead of time in order to keep the person or others safe. All right, so ECPs, the emergency control procedures, QET will send these to HRC when they're received as an incident report. So anytime an ECP is done, you'll need to fill out a GER and then submit it to us, and we'll submit it to TRE, or the Community Center Board. So some things they're not allowed to be used for is punishment for any convenience and as a substitute for services, supports, or instruction. And then you want to put all this information when you put the GER. So we want to do the description in as much detail as possible of the ECP, beginning and ending times, explanation of why it was necessary, and assessment of likelihood of reoccurrence. So with SCPs, they should be planned and written in a person-specific manner. We don't want just a list of SCPs and assign them to whoever may need them. They need to be written specific to that person. SCP should not be listed as part of the BISSP or ISSP methodology. SCPs must be reviewed by the IDT and HRC prior to implementation. And then if used more than 3 times within the previous 30 days, the IDT must meet and review the situation and endorse the current plan or prepare new plans. So essentially, if it's something that's happening within 30 days a lot, we want to make sure that we are providing all services and supports that are needed for that individual. So if anyone can come up with different plans, or if there's something we'd rather try, because obviously we don't want to use something if there's things that are lacking for that person. If an SCP will be used more frequently, IDT may request a DIDD to waive the specific rules. This requires sufficient justification and is rare. Administration relief for SCPs that are used daily is one example of that. We do actually have a client who has an SCP, which is posy mittens, because they rub their face and they hit themselves in the ear. So when they have the posy mittens on, they don't do that, and they'll rub their face with the posy mittens, and it's not as dangerous. So we had to submit for state to approve that, and we have a procedures that the provider has to do every day, skin checks, and he has to have them off for so often. SCPs are reviewed at least annually and should be discontinued by the IDT anytime the need will no longer exist. So some examples would be cameras in home or other residential settings, not allowing someone outside alone where they express their contrary desire, house rules that limit visiting hours for and then we have day program that would require participants to turn in their cell phones for the day, or it could be if they had to turn in their cell phones at home as well. So rights modification requirements. Rights modifications are based on the specific access need of the individual. They are not imposed across the board and are not based on the convenience of the provider. These would be things like everyone waking up at the same time, eating at the same time, bathing at the same time, etc. The process for implementation of rights mods is person-centered and ensures that the individual fully understands and agrees to the modification. Any rights modification has to be supported by a specific access need and justified in the person-centered plan. So the criteria must identify a specific and individualized access need, document positive interventions and supports used prior to any modification to the person-centered plan, and document less intrusive methods of meeting the need that have been tried but did not work. Include a clear description of the modification that is directly proportionate to the specific access need and must be tracked regularly to ensure the effectiveness and need for the modification. The limit and periodic review and plan to get off the modification. So when we write a HRC packet, we always go to the provider to see what has been tried in the past and what may have worked or may only worked for a small amount of time, because we have to see that other things have been tried. So that can be verbal prompting. It can be moving things around in the kitchen so they don't know where. Maybe they're constantly eating chocolate bars and it's causing them issues, and you'll move them periodically around. There's just got to be other ways that have been tried that are less invasive. And then the next thing is a time limit and periodic review and a plan to get off the modification. So although we know that not everyone's going to get off a modification because maybe their behaviors limit them, but maybe they'll never be able to not be a choking hazard. But we have to put in the plan a way that we would, even if we think that it'll never happen. So they want to see that we're trying. So the only right that can never be modified is the right to a physically accessible setting, and it's never subject to modification. So we have some what ifs. What if the individual chooses not to give their revokes their consent? So a court can impose restrictions on an individual without their consent. So think of probation or court orders. But if a provider is taking actions to implement a court order, the rights modification still requires their consent. So of course they can say they don't want you to search the room, or they want to drink alcohol and they're not allowed to. So that goes beyond us. If they break probation or a court order, then it's handled through the courts. We can try, but unless they sign a consent or, give their consent for the rights modification, even if it's court order or probation, we can't make them do it. So we want to always ask whether modifications are truly needed. Is there another way to handle the situation? Is there something we can do that we haven't tried? Use person-centered approach and honor dignity of risk. So we want to see what are the risks of the person by completing this modification, and what is the risk to them? Does it outweigh the risk of not having the modification? Is there a serious risk to anyone's health, safety? The modification can be used or continued for a short time. So as long as the provider immediately discontinues if there's no need for it. I don't have any modifications that I know right offhand that I can think of that are a risk to a person's health or safety. We want to implement staffings or other measures to de-escalate the situation and reach out to case managers to set up meetings as soon as possible. At the meeting, the individual can grant or deny their consent. So what if they choose not to give or revoke their consent? People can always decide not to consent. If it is something where the provider doesn't want to care for that person unless the risk, the HRC is there, the rights modification, they can explore providing a new provider that may not require the same modifications. Maybe they have to have something where they can't walk down the stairs by themselves, and maybe they want to find a house that just doesn't have stairs, so they don't have to have a certain modification such as a camera or a sensor. What if they don't have a guardian? So the person always leads the person-centered planning process when it's possible. There's no guardian or a person with similar decision-making authority, then only the individual can grant, deny, or withdraw consent. And then if there is a guardian or a person with similar authority, the court order must be consulted. And does it say that the guardian can make these kinds of decisions? So suspension of rights they are for protection of health and safety of an individual and or the community. They are in the packets include a written notice of suspension. They must include an informed consent. HRC will review it, and then they have to review it every 6 months by the IDT. A fading plan supports need to fade the fade required in the individualized plan. So right suspensions are based off health and safety concerns. Suspension may only be used to protect a person receiving services from endangering such persons, other, or property. And when implementing right suspensions, the specific right must be identified. That's something we do on our end. We have to figure out which right it is, and we write that in the notice of suspension in the IC. So some common suspensions would be line of sight, access to property, whether it's inside the house, outside the house. Maybe it's the anything in the house that could cause them harm. So if you had a den and maybe they were trying to light the fireplace on fire, since they have access to the whole home aside from your bedroom or other people's bedrooms. access to phone unsupervised, access to internet unsupervised, access to food or money. So those are some of the major rights that we have to have the right suspensions, modifications to take them away and good reason. So we can't just say, oh, the person eats and the doctor said his cholesterol is too high, but he keeps eating all night. That wouldn't be a good enough reason to take away the food because they have the right to be unhealthy. That's as an adult. I know many people have, their doctors probably told them, hey, you need to go on a diet, you need to lose weight. I know mine has. But we as adults have the right to keep eating if we want to, or eat unhealthy foods. So we can always verbally prompt, we can encourage them to make healthy decisions, but we can't physically take that away from them. Same with the internet. So if they're looking up porn and you don't like porn, that's not a good enough reason. It has to be a risk to themselves or others. So if they're not watching it in correct places, a modification could be to only have them access it in their bedroom or a proper place. But unless they have like sex offender status, it causes them to have certain issues where maybe they'll act it out, anything that would cause harm to other people, that's when you can actually have the right taken away. Court order suspensions are still reviewed by HRC to look at and how the providers are implementing suspension. So if you have something where someone's searching someone's room, taking anything away, weapons, alcohol, anything like that, we have to show exactly how the providers are implementing those suspensions, even though they're in a court order or probation order. So HRC reviews the proposed suspension. If implemented, HRC reviews it annually or as requested. IDT shall review it no less than every 6 months, and review documentation should include the reason for suspension, current circumstances, success failure of suspensions, decision to continue, modify, or discontinue. In documentation, the service plan must have documentation of the suspension as well as the plan to restore the rights. In discontinuation, suspensions must be discontinued as soon as circumstances warrant discontinuation. So an informed consent is just the agreement that expressed in writing is freely given after a fair explanation of the procedures to be followed, including identification of those which are experimental. We don't have any experimental things that we do here. So we do use them for rights modifications. We use them for psychotropic medications. So it has to have a description of the attendant discomforts and risk, benefits to be expected, and then appropriate alternative procedures together with explanation of respective benefits, discomforts, and risk of those alternate procedures. We must offer to answer any inquiries regarding the procedure. So if the client, the individual guardian, if they have any questions, we have to be able to explain to them exactly what's going on and any answers that they have. An instruction that the person giving consent is free to withdraw consent and discontinue participation in the project or activity anytime. That's the same with rights modification and rights suspensions. And a statement that withholding or withdrawal of consent shall not prejudice future provisions of appropriate services and supports to individual. So even if they decide to withdraw their consent, we still have to make sure that they have the proper services and supports. It may not necessarily be with the same provider. It may not even be with the same agency, but we would make sure they were in somewhere where they could have what they needed and also be supported. We wouldn't just be like, all right, we can't deal with you anymore, bye. We have to give them proper notice and find the right supports to help them. So if you have any questions, reach out to me or one of the team members and we will get any questions answered. Just send me an email and I will send you the test link. Let me know that you completed the client rights training. And then once you've completed that training, email me and that way I know to look for your grade. If you passed, I will send your certificate. If not, I will get with you and go over any questions that you didn't get correct and see maybe where you were struggling. Feel free to watch this video over again if you need to refresh. And then that is all. Thanks.